Hello and welcome to another episode of the DJ Project Criterion Collection. And here we're going to talk about Spine 316, Ron, directed by Akira Kurosawa, 1985. I've seen a fair amount of his filmography, not everything. I know he's done a lot, but of the films that I've seen, and certainly the films that I own of Kurosawa, I would have to say that Ron is perhaps my favorite of his. It could be kind of a toss-up between that and Seven Samurai, but Ron, there's a lot I like in Ron, and so I would say that would be the go-to favorite. But anyways, Ron, as it's Ron looks at Hidetora. It centers on Hidetora, played by Tatsuya Nakadai, who first worked with Kurosawa. He had a small bit part in Seven Samurai, but then he became an antagonist for the Rohim with no name pairs, Yojimbo and Sanjuro, and has worked with Kurosawa since then. But at any rate, so he plays Hidetora, who's a clan patriarch who's coming in years and has had a long history of battling and warring and conquering behind him, and now it's at a moment of relative peace amongst everybody. And so, in the twilight of his years, he decides to divide his kingdom among his three sons. And that's where all the problems start. Sound familiar? Actually, the interesting thing is that Kurosawa did not originally intend this to be a Japanese reimagining of King Lear. That only came about... Actually, it came fairly early on in development, but he did not go into the project with that intention in mind. I think he realized that certain elements were very similar to the Lear story, and then it just went from there. Whether he intended it or not, it certainly works. It certainly doesn't hurt the film at all. And in fact, it affirms some universality on both the part of Shakespeare and Kurosawa. So why do I like this film? Considering that it's later Kurosawa, and later Kurosawa tends to, actually that's a bit of a broad generalization, because you got Dreams and you got a few other things that are not as bleak, but but Ron is quite bleak. It's not going to go well at all. In fact, one of actually my favorite scene in the film, and it's pointed out, and I know I'm not alone in this, but it's the siege of the third castle. When after the battle gets kind of primed a little bit, where you see like the first few soldiers that are shot by arrows, and then switches to music, and as the scene is playing out, so it's music overlaid on this montage showing the siege of the castle, and the music was composed by Toru Takemitsu, and he was instructed by Kurosawa, and who was very particular about his music and about what kind of sounds he wanted. And they're almost always, with some exceptions, they're almost always based on something some classical music that he has heard. Rashomon was informed by Bolero. I forget what Seven Samurai was supposed to be based on. But here, with Ron, he wanted the basis to be Mahler. And I believe Songs of the Earth is what, or Das Lied von der Erde, I believe was the basis. Either that or no, it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't Songs of the Death of Children, or it wasn't that morbid, but it was Mahler, and so, and actually this is part of the reason why I like it. I mean, I have a fondness for Mahler, but it's what I think of when I think about Mahler. I think about there are these intense emotions that are just bubbling and just stewing, but you never it never feels like an explosion. It's not like listening to Beethoven, where it's where the contrasts are very very strong. Here there's a it's refined. It has a bit of a smoothness and elegance to it, but it doesn't lose the intensity. It's an interesting paradox where something that feels very very refined and very elegant, and yet you feel this tremendous emotional weight. That's how I hear Mahler's music, and also then consequently that's how I see Ron. It's all these. It's basically it's not just the present moment that sucks. The sons warring with each other, or actually two of the sons warring each other. The third one, the stand-in for Cordelia, is actually in exile, and of course he's the more voice of reason, and it's like, oh, what have I done? I kicked him out, and he was right, and oops. Tragedies abound. But anyways, but it's not just the present moment that sucks. You also get the sense that this is a long history coming back to bite him in the ass, and because he achieved what he was able to achieve through warring and causing other people to suffer, and so it's karma's a bitch, and and this is what fuels his madness. And yes, there is a fool character in there, and it's a nice little reminder of that. So it's it has the right amount of drama. It has and yeah, it just has the right amount of drama. It's I mean, again, it wasn't intended to be a Japanese reimagining of Shakespeare, but it certainly helped in a lot of respects. And this is probably the thing that can get a bit overwhelming when you watch a lot of Japanese cinema, is that you're not readily familiar with, particularly with the period pieces. You may not be readily familiar with the periods, and you may have to look at a basic timeline to kind of look at where Japan was and kind of where everything fits. And sometimes it's really, and so I would imagine, so mostly for non-Japanese who are watching these, they're going to pick up something else that maybe someone from Japan wouldn't. And this is probably why Kurosawa is revered so much in the West. Japan never really cared that much, and in fact, in Kurosawa's later career, it was much harder for him to finance his films, and he had to look to outside sources. The film he did prior to this, Kajimusha, was actually the financing was assisted by Francis Ford Coppola and George Lucas, and for Ron, it was Sergei Spielberman, who ran Studio Canal, and I must say this is the biggest loss. Yes, this is out of print. Yes, this is Studio Canal's fault, but I think this title of the Studio Canal titles is probably the biggest loss, I think, to the Criterion Collection. I'd also say Diary of a Country Priest too, because that's a favorite one. But this one's a big loss, because I remember when I was getting into cinema, and of course getting into the Criterion Collection, and with getting into Kurosawa, when you enter into Kurosawa, you know about the major films, you know, and Ron was a title that I always kept in the back of my mind, but I also knew that Ron, prior to, as far as home video releases, didn't really do the colors justice, and I knew, and I had this feeling that Criterion had to put this out, and if they did, if and when they did, they would do it right. They would, and sure enough, they did, and it's just gorgeous. Actually, it's not really gorgeous, and I mean the colors are very vibrant. That's what they are. But if I say rich, it makes me think of Technicolor, and that's not really the point. It's very bold. It feels like very bold paint strokes. And Kurosawa himself was a painter, and actually that's how he pre-visualized the film. That's how he storyboarded the film. He painted, and that would give an idea of how, I mean, obviously how the images are going to be composed, but also like the mise en scène and such. And in fact, the best way to illustrate that is in the cover artwork. I mean, it's more Pollock than anything else, and I don't think he was informed that much, but his paintings are actually watercolors, and so this is actually quite appropriate. And then the red is actually the title in Japanese, but and the colors represent the three suns, and so it's and actually it's good that the Pollock approach was used, because again it's very emotional expressionist, but also, but like I said before, there is this not quite subtlety, but it's not this big explosion of rage, and you almost don't need to do that. It sort of speaks for itself. It's intense without it being completely overbearing, and it's just it's a very, you know, it's a well made, well done film, and it just goes back to that emotional weight, and and actually, what's interesting, I say that it's bleak, and yeah, there's definitely there definitely is blood in it. There definitely is an element of tragedy, but it is a tragedy. But it's not absolutely without hope. There's that little, but the best way to describe it is that it's like having a day that's overcast, or when you have, I think maybe it's kind of like today right now, where you can see the sun peering through, but it's just covered with this thin, almost transparent layer of gray, and that's kind of how this film sort of feels. Is that there's that little slimmer of hope. Actually, no, there's a thin layer of gray, and then occasionally a storm cloud passes through, and then sometimes it breaks a little bit, and then goes again. The point is that it is very bleak, but it's not as bleak as maybe one may seem. So, but yeah, Ron, it's a shame that this is out of print. It is an absolute shame, and in fact, there was slated a Blu-ray release that was going to be put out, but then they had to pull it because they lost the rights to it. So it was an absolute shame. Rashomon, I do believe... No, not Rashomon. Of course Rashomon's in Criterion still. Ron is... I know it's out on Blu-ray now. It is through Lionsgate. I've seen some captures of it, and it's okay. Some people said that it looks similar to prints that I've seen, but then again, prints are not always the most reliable gauges, because there's inconsistencies in the prints. It depends on when it was made, how long it's been around, how well it's stored, and so forth. And so, my impression is that if it is comparable to a print, then there is some slight fading. I don't know if there was any kind of image manipulation. Probably, but probably done in a more subtle way. And again, to try to try to bring it closer to what it was originally. And again, it's the colors needed to be bold, and so I mean it's okay, but I would rather, in spite of it doesn't really quite measure up and I don't know what it would have looked like on Blu-ray, because there is a difference between seeing something on DVD compared to Blu-ray, but even though even though and actually the other thing that the other upset with Ron is that this is actually quite feature packed. The other thing that this includes is a documentary that, or not so much, well, yeah, documentary slash sorta kinda travelogue made by Chris Marker, famous for making La Jetée and Sans Soleil, which is a film I'm going to cover somewhat shortly. It's closer to the pipeline. It's closer to now than some other titles. But anyways, and he made it while Kurosawa was making Ron. It was called AK, and it's another little window into Kurosawa and the way that he worked, and an appreciation for what he's able to do. And I think that's exclusive to Criterion. That you don't see that in the Blu-ray. So, in spite of the fact that it's not issued by Criterion, I will say go see it if you haven't seen it. Again, it's very again, I have to see more of his filmography, but it still ranks very high as my favorite of Kurosawa's films. And it's it's a great example of a cinematic master at work. So yeah, go see it. It is out there. It's just not done through Criterion, and it's a shame. But please go see it. And I like it. And if you don't like it, I'm still gonna like it, and I'm not gonna change my mind. I like what I like. So, but yeah, and that's Ron. And until next time, take care.